Hi, welcome to Bogy and Dave. Glad you're watching the show. My name is Dave, and
It
I'm
is?
joined
Are you
by.
sure?
I always forget this part of the show, which is probably the most I'll lead in. I'm joined by my co-host, Bogy. We're going to get into some interesting theories today.
Continuation from
last week and some sci-fi. But I do want to bring up that we do now have a person that can imitate a dog, and they're running for president. And the Pope ought to shut his damn mouth. I don't care whether I'm a Catholic, baptized Catholic, but the Pope, this is, to me, in my opinion, is one of the worst popes that we've ever, in my opinion, so far. And he ought to shut his mouth about borders, because these people that talk about borders and everything else, why don't you just tear your borders down at the Vatican City, stop running around with bodyguards, do like presidents did 100 years ago, no bodyguards, no guns, shut up, and stay out of our politics. Okay, that said, I got to see the Stephen Hawking's movie, The Theory of Everything. As a movie, it was very well done, and I think he got the Academy Award. He deserved it. It was interesting how young he was and how so far ahead he was in the way he looked at things, especially about the Big Bang Theory and everything else, which I know you want to talk about. So as we were speaking off camera, something happened recently that I think you ought to let our viewers know, and that is about the black hole theory.
Albert Einstein.
Albert Einstein's theory of relativity.
One of the final components of Einstein's theory of relativity was proven to be accurate and correct, which
gives credibility.
why wouldn't it be? Right? I mean, that's the one thing that I have to put a little sidebar here. What we call science, it just took, I'm not even sure when he died, 49 maybe?
I don't
50,
remember.
I'm not even sure. It took science, 50 years plus to see if Einstein was correct. They couldn't assume he was correct. That science has this issue with, it needs to be quantifiable and qualifiable, absolutely. And when you ask about the imagination, no. When you ask about the supernatural, no. When you ask about ghosts or the paranormal, no. Because we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't measure it. So they limit ourselves. Science, what we call science, what we teach children science in school, is not science. It's antiquated stuff that you can only see, hold, touch, measure. It doesn't account or take into consideration the vast capacity and power of our amazing imaginations.
Okay, that's where you're going with
How
this.
would we have novels?
Right.
How would we have movies and art?
How would we figure out that we could get the penicillin out of a mole?
If you didn't have the imagination.
If you didn't have the imagination to think.
And you know what the irony is? You look at the books Brave New World and Animal Farm. Those were born out of the imagination. And they're true.
And they're true, exactly.
Came true.
We always refer to Animal Farm and George Orwell's 1984.
So like the last show, you and I were talking about,
yeah,
people put limits on their God, or God, what I call God. They put limits on God. They put limits on Allah. They put limits on Yahweh. They put limits on the supreme being. It's not about limits. Allah isn't going to say, okay, I'll take you because you're Muslim, but not you because you're Christian. And God, similarly, a Christian God is not going to say, okay, I'll take you because you said you were sorry, but I'm not going to take you because you didn't. No. There's mercy, but it's born in the imagination.
But those people that have questioned that have said, if there is a God, okay, and it's good that we can play the devil's advocate, because I got to get people on the show once I can get you to change your contract. But when we talk about God, people always come back and they say, well, if there was a God, how do we account, why would he have ever let the Holocaust and the genocide of Armenians and all the genocide of Russians take place? Why? If there is this all-loving God, why would he let that happen?
I believe
or
part
she
of it,
let that
yeah,
happen.
I believe a lot of it has to do with free will and karma. The irony to all of that, what you just said, which is a great question, because I ask myself that too some days, believe me, when I see the events of the world. Here's the big rub. Karma is like a balance sheet. It's like a bank balance sheet. And often on the show I refer to Hinduism and Buddhism. They account and they do take into consideration the yin and the yang. They take into consideration the sweet and the sour. Khalil Gibran said you cannot have the sweet without the sour, or else you would never appreciate the sweet.
The sweet, exactly.
And the thing is this, the balance sheet, the karmic balance sheet, whatever SOB walks into a nightclub or a restaurant and blows the place up and kills 90 people, God forbid, or like the Paris attacks, guess what? That's on their balance sheet, the balance sheet of their soul. And while we're only here for a blip, the expanse of our lives are several blips. There are many blips, there are many lives, there are many decades and years and centuries. That carries over. So it's almost like getting demoted. What I believe is we have a hierarchy here. There's a hierarchy of spirituality. There's a hierarchy on the other side. That's the balance sheet. So if you, pardon the expression, if you screw somebody here, like royally screw them, like a politician, like who cares, I'm gonna do this and we're gonna make out and don't worry about my constituents, we're gonna pass this bill and we're gonna make some money on the side through the lobbying. You know what? I believe that goes against their karma. And if they think this life is long, wait till they see the next 3. Because I believe, and as science is already starting to prove, good science, that we're gonna start to live longer, okay? And there are things happening with energies and in our bodies, and this goes back to, it's going to dovetail right back to Einstein in a second. So those people who think that they're going to have that temporary reward now, and they're going to screw the majority just to get what they want, it's not going to pay off in the long run. It may pay off in this life for a few years, for a decade, for 20 years, but when you get older and you pass on, I believe in the next incarnations, they're going to be like 5 times longer.
People,
Does that make sense to you, what I just said?
Well, it does, but I still have this, I can't get my arms wrapped around people that knowingly will do something that they know to be wrong, that will hurt a lot of people. They would take advantage of a lot of people and yet feel as though they can go to sleep at night, feel as though they did the right thing.
2 words for that though, ego. Naivete.
Yeah,
I think it's ignorance also.
I hope that there is a payoff or a payback.
Many people do today.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The people that have, hurt others. I mean, you know, whenever we talk about genocides, we forget the genocides that happened. We always talk about the Holocaust that involved killing of 6 million Jews. We forget how many Armenians were killed. Literally almost the whole, wiped off this planet by the Turks. And we forget about the 20 million Russians that were killed, and Joseph Stalin used famine as a lie, okay? And we forget about that the countries and people could actually do that to other people.
Absolutely.
And just expect.
It's hideous.
They don't have a conscience.
Right.
Or they cannot possibly believe that in the hereafter, they're going to be screwed, or something is going to be payback. There's got to be payback.
I believe, personally, it's my opinion that I believe there is payback. I do. Well, sometimes it'll happen in this life. Sometimes you got to wait till the next.
Yeah.
But I believe there is payback, and I believe that that's where, in the Bible it says we are all created equal. I think the equality comes in the long haul. It's not just about now, which is a great oxymoron, and it's a great contradiction because people are all about what have you done for me lately, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Look at sports.
Yeah.
What have you done for me lately? Look at Wade Boggs. Yeah. Wade Boggs was with the Red Sox. He bats .259. Dan Duquette cuts him loose.
Yeah.
What have you done for me lately? Well, the guy hit .300 every single year before that.
Yeah.
He cuts him loose. He goes to the Yankees. .300 hitter again.
Wins the World Series.
Wins the World Series. Goes to Tampa Bay. He's still a damn good hitter over there too.
Yeah.
So if we get out of that mindset of what have we done for you lately, or what have you done for me lately, if you look at Hollywood, Hollywood suddenly has gotten into the same formula. It's all about now, now, now. No. That's not how you create lasting art.
Yeah.
That is not how you create a classic. That is not how you that's not how you write another classic novel. I'm not so sure that the novels that are written today are going to last and have the longevity that the classics like the Dickens novels and F. Scott Fitzgerald novels and Hemingway, which I'm not a fan of Hemingway, but good writer,
Yeah.
damn good writer. You know, John O'Hara,
Burroughs.
Edith Wharton.
Yeah,
Edith Wharton,
Edith
hell of a writer.
Right.
You know, so Gertrude Stein was a hell of a writer. I mean, you can go back right on the line. They crafted their books. James Joyce met F. Scott Fitzgerald in Paris. Okay. Joyce was working on a book. Fitzgerald was working on his second or third novel at the time. Fitzgerald was very proud. So he looks at Joyce and he says, "Oh, yeah, I've been working on my book for about 2.5 years. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I've been working on mine for about 7. Scott just looked at him like, "What? Oh, my God." And the thing is that right before Scott Fitzgerald died, he said, "I'm so happy that I'm writing now and not later because I can already see the era of convenience coming." Now, he saw the times that we're living in now. He foresaw it. It was already starting to happen in 1940 when he died. Now, here's the rub. I'm going to go back to that again. The imagination. Mm-hmm. Imagination can give birth to so much more science. But these classical scientists won't allow it. And yet Einstein, through his imagination, even though he himself also said he even discounted the supernatural. Einstein did also.
Yeah.
But it was his imagination and theories that led to this theory of relativity. I mean, what is a theory? It is an element of the imagination using numbers and hypotheses and what ifs, right?
All what ifs. It's based on
It's
a what if. Right.
Right. I mean, that's a theory.
How much more science fiction can you get?
Right. So I believe they perform their work under a certain amount of contradiction. But Einstein proved, last week, it was proven, that two huge bodies, heavenly bodies or masses,
right,
when they collide, they will absolutely distort and bend the space-time line. Now, that space-time line is something that has been talked about in almost every time travel novel and movie out there, almost.
The space-time line is the timeline to which we live
We
as
are
human
on.
beings. We are on. We
You
live
got
as
it.
human beings. And if that gets bent in any way, manner, shape, or form, then that which happened before us may not be there. That we may
We
be
can
living.
switch train tracks in an instant.
Yeah.
Now, as an example of this theory, as I was saying to you before the show, if you and I were holding this big thin rubber mat, and somebody took the Earth, a
heavy ball.
model of the Earth, a heavy model of the Earth, and dropped it in the center, obviously it's going to distort.
Right.
Now, if two huge objects come out of nowhere and collide, they will alter the gravitational pull and gravitational force of that ball, of that Earth, and it will distort. And they've theorized that it might actually create string portals that are possibly accessible and make time travel possible.
Okay. So that as you bring that up, there's a movie out right now, serialized, and it was a book written by Stephen King called 11/22/63. And the big question is, if you could go back in time, A, would you kill Hitler if you could, before he, okay? Would you be able to interfere with Kennedy's assassination? And the theory is we may have saved all those lives that were lost in Vietnam, all right? Now, what happens to time under those, I mean, was this supposed to happen? If it didn't happen, and if you changed it, what would have come out of it, and how would history have changed?
Drastically. But I'm going to throw a zinger at you. Last show, excuse me, the last show you and I talked about alien intelligence, right?
Right.
And we talked about it a little bit before that too. It is my belief that there are governors of our galaxy. Call it under God, call it whatever you will. Call them heavenly hosts, call them higher intelligence.
Okay.
I believe they would not let the mortals on this planet that are in power have access to those controls. I don't think so. Even though there are theories that there's a woman in the CIA, there's a woman who worked for somebody who worked in the CIA. Mm-hmm. she's been making her rounds and speeches all around the country for the last 20 years. She's on YouTube. She claims that this man on his deathbed said that the CIA has been time traveling since 1965. There's also a man out there who's saying the same thing, who said his father did it too. Now, is that true? I have no idea. But my theory on that is if they were able to time travel, I'm not sure how much access they would have to undoing things. But when you start talking about string portals, that's a different story. Because I think you're entering directly into the source. Does that make sense?
Well, what you're doing when you're talking about the strings, you're talking about a specific line that if it gets bent or shifted, that's the track that we're on. And if somehow that gets shifted.
Well, it emits, no, the strings, according to the theory,
Okay.
are the things that shoot out because of the
force.
The force and the power and the speed.
Right.
It almost like it shatters the dimension.
Okay,
right?
so that
it's like,
shoots out.
So it's like a shard or a string that shoots out, and you can access those, they're saying. They said you might be able to access those. So in other words, if there's a spaceship up there and you fly into that, one of those strings, it may be a portal to an instant portal to another time.
Well, okay. So now we've got about 11 minutes left in the show.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, I know. So let's just for a second, let's drift into you bring up a movie that comes to mind called Contact with Jodie Foster.
Sure.
And she had dropped in a matter of seconds. But in a matter of seconds, it was hours on the tape. And in that time, she had traveled and met one of the alien beings, okay? It's a great show because what the alien being says to her and how he appears to her is just an incredible, very touching moment. But they could never account for what happened to her. She just seemed to have crashed in a matter of seconds. The thing was a failure. Yet, when they looked at the tapes, the very end of the movie, they said, how do you account for these 6 hours of all of this that's on the tape that wouldn't have never existed if she had just been gone seconds? Therefore, the time travel is that when if we were to enter a dimension or a different time travel, would 3 years be 2 minutes?
Yeah, it could be. I don't know. You're right.
Would 2 hours be seconds?
Absolutely. No, you're right. It's a great question. And the thing is, I've always believed in time travel. I'll share this with you. I may have before, I'm not sure, but when I was working on a time travel love story,
okay.
It was about F. Scott Fitzgerald in his last book, as a matter of fact. A time traveler goes back and he's, helps Scott Fitzgerald finish his last book.
You've got to see the movie Midnight in Paris. I want you to see the movie.
Is it about that?
It's about that. It's with
about Fitzgerald?
It's with Fitzgerald and Hemingway, and it was written by Woody Allen. And in the movie, it's a great little movie. I have it. I'll let you borrow. Okay. It's called Midnight in Paris.
How old is that movie?
Came out about 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So when I was working on that, I did a lot of research. I met Scott Fitzgerald's authoritative biographer, became friends with him, Matthew Bruckley, great man. He has since passed, God rest his soul. But he showed me a lot of artifacts. Anyway, when I was working on that book, I started to have vivid time travel dreams every night. And no one can tell me that I wasn't there. No one can tell me that I was not in the 1920s New York City. I mean, it felt as real as day. I mean, I felt like I was having almost lucid astral dreams, but I felt as though I was actually there. I saw Times Square 1920. I was even walking on a curbside, and I saw a man reading a newspaper in a fedora, like it was like you and I are sitting across from each other right now. And I just would wake up, and this probably happened over the series of about 2 to 3 weeks, every single night. And I would wake up like, wow. And I wanted so badly to write to some medical journal or psychology magazine and say, this is what's going on. I believe you can time travel definitely through hypnosis, but also through the mind. You can time travel through the mind, which is the basis for the novel Time and Again by Jack Finney, and also Somewhere in Time, the movie starring Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour.
It was written by one of the best science fiction writers, Matheson. It was one of the best science fiction authors of all time.
He just passed like 3 years ago, I think.
In fact, if you read the original Somewhere in Time, it's an extremely good book.
I'm a huge fan of all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I've had personal experiences with this in Dreamland, but I've also read and watched a lot of stuff, and I believe it's possible in other ways. You can that's also, as I've said on past shows, that's how powerful our minds are, and and we need to unlock this stuff. And again, classical science would say, well, that's just a dream. It's your subconscious. I can't measure it. I can't feel it. I can't see it. It's not quantifiable. It's not qualifiable. So they shoot you down immediately, and it's wrong. Because you're discounting and limiting humanity. You're discounting and limiting our innate spiritual selves and the energy of ourselves, of who we are.
It's very strange, but true that scientists are probably the most hypocritical people there are, because on one hand, they want to deal strictly with facts. And I don't mean hypocritical in the bad sense, but if you listen to the way they handle their theories are theories, okay? But when you want to talk to them, when you want to prove something, they want to talk about fact. But yet, when they have a theory or something that they want to prove, it's all based on nothing. There's no
theoretical.
fact. It's theoretical. But they go off in that tangent to prove it. And now once they
and they'll show you numbers. They'll say, well, look, here's how I qualify and quantify it. Doesn't matter. You can show me all the numbers in the world. It's still a theory. Did you test it yet? Can you show it? Can you show me the results physically like you demand of me? Right. They can't.
So when we as people, okay, are dealing with something like, for instance, the environmental concerns, and they talk about global warming, okay? Now, there are some that say that it's not man-made. It's definitely something that's cyclical. Well, we know that weather is cyclical, because of the El Nino that shifts, okay, and comes up and whatever, and there are belts of weather. So again, we're dealing with a group of scientists that are talking about theory and a group talking about fact, all right? Where's people fall in? Again, they create this argument that divides people rather than say, you know what? Maybe there is something to it, or maybe there isn't. But let's give it some thought and see where the thought process takes us, rather than be screaming at each other and saying, whatever. But you bring up the movie, not the movie, the book Time and Again by Jack Finney. Great book. Okay, it never was made into a movie, but let's talk for a second about some science fiction movies that I thought were really good. One, The Day the Earth Stood Still, where it was a warning, okay? But as people out there don't know, the alien being that came to talk, in all actuality in the book, was the robot. And the robot that stood guard over the spaceship was actually the alien being. And that was the twist at the end, where he came and he warned that, unless you get your house in order, we're not going to stand for this, which is about the whole nuclear scare at the time. Okay, great science fiction book. The Time Machine.
Yeah.
Time Machine. Yeah. Okay, the remake was terrible, but the original one with Rod, I can't remember. Rod Taylor was a very, very good story. There was another one that talked about H.G. Wells going into the future and trying to prevent, or going in the past to prevent Jack the Ripper.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't called. Yeah, was it called Time and Again?
No, there was a second. That was the second one. It wasn't Time and you're close. Time and Again, and then what was the name of Jack Finney's follow-up book? There was a follow-up to Time and Again.
Jack Finney's first was Time
And then he wrote a second one.
Right,
And
right.
it was that was the name of that one.
Right. There was another
And
great.
it starred the woman who's married to Ted Danson, whose name escapes me.
Steenburgen.
Yep.
Right.
Mary Steenburgen.
There was a great book written by, his last name is Brock, and Peter Brock.
I've heard of this.
And the name of the book is called If I Never Get Back.
Oh, you told me
Yeah,
about
tell me
this.
about this. Because we liked it because it involved baseball, but it's a guy that goes back in time and meets up with Mark Twain, you know. Now, the whole basis for Somewhere in Time was he dying? And did all this take place because he was dying? Because the way the book is written from his brother's point of view, that it's after his brother has died and what he's found out.
Really?
Yeah. You got to read it. It's much different than the
It
movie.
was a good movie, though.
Yeah, it was a
It's one of
great
my- It's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, great
and,
movie.
Teresa Wright was in that movie.
Artificial Intelligence by Spielberg. One of Spielberg's better movies. A very long movie, but it brings out some very valid points about where our society's headed in terms of robotics, where history is headed, and then what are they going to find when civilization on this planet is no longer? What will they come back and find?
Like
Do you
the Planet
remember?
of the Apes.
Yeah, well, we're down to a minute and a half. Remember the book, it was a science fiction book, A Canticle for Leibowitz? Okay, well, it's about societies long since gone, demolished, and these aliens come down, and they figured that society had to worship toilets. Why? Because in every building that they found were toilets. So they concluded that the toilet to us was some god. You're gonna read that. It's called A Canticle for Leibowitz.
What a name.
I know it's one of the best science fiction stories. But we're down to a minute left. We want to continue this about
Well, it's fascinating.
about going
You know,
to some of the paranormal too, because it all has to do with what you've been talking about, is the power of the mind and how very little of it we use. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but we just don't. We don't. You know, out-of-body experience, which you've talked about.
And I'll tell you what's a fascinating comparison. On the shows that we've talked about, you know, politics or whenever people talk about politics, it's draining.
Yeah.
Last show and this one now, I feel energized.
Yeah.
Because these topics are energetic.
Yeah.
And don't forget, our words are energy, our thoughts are energy. So even what we're exchanging here has an energetic pulse and reverberation and resonance that even people who watch this on YouTube or at home, they're going to feel it too if they find this, these subjects of interest to them.
Right.
They're going to feel that too. It's going to reverberate.
Well, we're down to 8 seconds, and I think what we're trying to push is we've got to get the division out of our culture.
I agree.
And we've got to start thinking about what is really best for
Enriching.
people. Enriching. And it's obvious that we need to, in the words of Monty Python, try something completely different.
Totally.
Anyway, thank you for watching. Look for us on YouTube, Bogy and Dave. You can catch our shows and watch them repeatedly. We'll see you next week with the continuance of our topic today. Yeah.